Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Going Nuclear. Today is a very special episode because we are here in Deep River at the Canadian Nuclear History Museum with Morgan Brown, who is the president of this organization. So Morgan, welcome. Let's start off with, tell us a little bit about this facility. We've taken a tour of this facility, extensive tour. You have so many cool artifacts and such rich history in this building. Tell us a little bit more about it.
Well, this collection of segments of Canada's nuclear history started with a few of us back in about 2015 wanting to collect things before they disappeared, before people threw them out. We knew people who had in town, they'd moved away or they died perhaps, and there were dumpsters outside and people were throwing out all sorts of interesting junk into them. And we lost out on it. We knew it. So we wanted to tell the story of Canada's, we're the town of nuclear pioneers, Canadian nuclear pioneers, and we wanted to tell as much as we could of its long history here. So we incorporated in August 2017 as a nonprofit, a charitable organization, and Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, AECL, have loaned us this building to use for housing our facility, housing our artifacts. And Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, on behalf of AECL, they look after the building. So it's a really useful relationship. We have a use of this space for free. We've been collecting stuff ever since. We catalog things. We display them. We're trying to tell a bit of Canada's nuclear story. We're entirely independent of AECL and CNL. I'm very grateful, good relationship with them, very good. And we store some of their artifacts or display some of their artifacts, the big models here. The long-term vision is that we can essentially earn enough money and by grants and also donors and whatever, to actually have our own facility, which would be a little larger, quite a bit larger, because we're running out of space for the artifacts. We want to broaden our collection. Right now it's very AECL-centric, as you'd guess. Though we have all sorts of things from various sites across Canada, but AECL was very much central to the Canadian nuclear story. So it's not surprising that we have so much stuff. But from the mining industry, we want some things. We've got a few bits and pieces from the utilities, from the universities, other big nuclear facilities across Canada. Like I don't think we have anything from Triumph as yet, nor the Saskatchewan, the Canadian Light Source in Saskatoon. Our vision is to have our own place. Perhaps I think of it as my dream is to have Canada's National Nuclear Museum and Archives as well, a place where all sorts of historical documents are saved. The nuclear industry actually does tend to save a lot of things because they want to know the past of their plants, for instance, and how were things built, how were they designed. We're actually looking to do both that, but also the memos written, why things were chosen to do, go certain paths. That's our long-term vision, is to actually increase. We're an entirely volunteer organization right now. We're all amateurs. First steps would be to be able to get high school students in here volunteering for their volunteer hours, and summer students, perhaps working with CNL. That would be a great thing to do. And then eventually earning enough money that we can have a professional curator. I tell people we need professional help, and you can take that any way you want. So that's the long-term vision, is to actually become a center for preservation of these artifacts and documents, a place where they're displayed, interpreted for the public, like what was this industry, telling that story. But also what really tickles our fancy, so to speak, is when we get researchers coming in here and we can actually be useful to history researchers, but also actually within the nuclear industry itself. When people come to the museum, our entranceway is what we call our shrine to NRU on one side, which was National Research Universal, the very big research reactor at Chalk River Laboratories. And Deep River is the bedroom community of the Chalk River Laboratories. So people get confused, yes, between Deep River and Chalk River. So NRU is displayed there, a lot on actually some of the medical isotope production there, some of the tooling used to restore the reactor in 2010 when the vessel needed some repairs. And on the other side, actually, there are pictures from the early days of, before this was even known as Atomic Energy of Canada Limited. It was part of the National Research Council, established in 1944, the laboratory here, growing out of the Montreal laboratories, all World War II time frame. And so we have some pictures of the early days here of when it was all forest or farms up this way. Then as we move into the museum, yes, we see the ACR 700, very beautiful model created, which is essentially, although it was never built as a reactor, is in many ways typical of the CANDU reactor. It's a cutaway, so you can see all the fuel channels, fuel bundles, interesting parts like that. We have a lot of small items on display, many different types of radiation meters. Also, as you mentioned, my favorite artifact is this little vial of deuterated or heavy hydrogen in paraffin wax, and that dates itself back to the late 1930s, produced in Norway, and the French researchers bought that stock of heavy water during the war, early parts of the war. Then it got smuggled back to Britain as the Germans invaded France. It became part of the Cavendish laboratories at Cambridge, and that whole laboratory was moved across to Canada, to the Montreal laboratories established at l'Université de Montréal. And anyway, this little vial we have, some of that heavy hydrogen is in the wax inside this test tube. And we have just a little sample of this long trail of early research work. We have a display on the nuclear power demonstration, or NPD reactor, which was built up the valley here, 20 or 25 kilometers from here. And it was the first, essentially the first CANDU reactor, designed by Canadian General Electric and built by them with Ontario Hydro and also Atomic Energy. We have collections of various retirement gifts, often fascinating pieces in themselves. Back in the day when they would make things for people retiring, whether it's the coffee table for Les Haywood, which interestingly enough includes, it's a beautiful coffee table and includes these little icons that are made of all sorts of ACL projects he was involved with. But we also have a sheet of paper in there which describes the 4 people who made the table. And it's just a little extra that we really like, that the average person or the skilled workers are also included in that artifact. We have electroscopes, which we recently came into our possession because they were hidden in someone's basement for decades. They were actually surplus and they were being thrown out. Someone rescued them in the 1960s. We won't say who because I'm not sure if they were supposed to steal garbage, but anyway, they kept them. And now we have them, these wonderful artifacts predating Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, actually. Other things from the waste management work done out at Whiteshell Laboratories in Manitoba. Models of the Douglas Point and Gentil 1 reactors. We have one of our first big artifacts is the input desk from the very first digital computer at Atomic Energy, dating from the 1950s, which was rescued from the scrap man in the 1960s, and somehow it's come into our possession. The control panel for the Slowpoke reactor in the University of Alberta. Lots of artifacts on the walls, including a chalkboard, which is a replica of a chalkboard where these scientists were writing important parameters on when they first started up the NRX accident in 1947. We have a library here, small artifacts. We have an Order of Canada, which the president of the company, Lorne Gray, received. We have a little shrine, as we call it, to Wilfred Bennett Lewis, who is known as the father of the CANDU reactor. So it's an eclectic collection. It's not arranged in good chronological order. we've grouped things together, especially our artifacts chair, Jim Ungren, has done a marvelous job of putting QR codes on everything and digging into the details of its past and then arranging them. So that's our museum in a nutshell. We do have a virtual tour on our website if people want to have a look at it. It's changed a little bit since then because we've added more artifacts. We're not open regular hours as yet. I try for Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday afternoons. However, we love having visitors. And so if you want to send us an email to info@nuclearheritage, one word, nuclearheritage.com. That's our address. And so use that and book a tour. We have people coming all times of the year, all times of the week. Personally, I've always loved history, technical history in particular, but especially more recent history, World War II, World War I, things like this. The 20th century has been most interesting. And aside from railways, nuclear is my favorite area of history and specializing in Canadian. So there's always been a bit of a fascination there, and people knew this. So when we first got people together for this museum, I was invited, are you interested? Well, of course I am. So I joined up then. I think history has a great deal to teach us. It doesn't have to be dry and boring, dates and things. It can be a lot of stories. I enjoy telling stories of real people, telling the fact, showing that they had lives other than what they think. W.B. Lewis, for instance, the father of the can-do, apparently a hard-working, brilliant guy who would take home a briefcase full of all sorts of work. He was a bachelor. I guess that helped. So he had no family commitment, so he got home and would work and yet he also loved to go fishing and would camp out sometimes go with colleagues. And we have photographs of him out cooking a meal over a campstove, and you go, wow, that's the same great W.B. Lewis, and yet here he is camping. And really kind of neat things like this. Bertram Brockhouse, we have a photograph of him up on stage at an amateur theater competition in the early 1950s. He's the same guy who later won the Nobel Prize in Physics. It's really good to be able to tell those stories. The daughter of the latest Nobel Prize winner, Art MacDonald, she lives across the street from me. Wow. And so I've met Art a few times. He's been interviewed right here for not for our purpose. Well, one of our videos was of him, but also for other videos he's been interviewed here. A wonderful, warm, generous person, and really enjoy. So it's neat. By doing this kind of thing, you also get to meet some very, very interesting people, and really have enjoyed it from that aspect. Learning from history, though, it really is important. And actually, I think there are dollars in it. We've done a huge amount of research work in Canada, and projects that have happened in the past, sometimes they might have run out of money before they're really finished, or no need was seen for it, so they canceled the project or put it on hold. And so someone would write up some final reports, but then they'd get put into archives and forgotten about. I believe that there's actually a lot of work we've done in the past. They're like nuggets or ore bodies in this great mound of research done here at the labs, but also across Canada. And we've forgotten about it. And if we can bring that to the surface again, it might inspire new ideas, new technologies, better ways of doing experiments. Maybe we can redo some of those experiments with modern capability, modern simulation capability as well. I think there's a lot in our history that we can actually apply now. We've done this work, so don't reinvent the wheel, and it might trigger fresh ideas. So I think there's a lot of usefulness in history. My favorite nuclear history story has to be, though, that of Stephen Whelan, who was a utility worker at the labs in 1950. He was killed on, I think it was December 1950, he was at the wrong place at the wrong time and had a chemical explosion at the plant. And he was killed by this explosion. It was in the era of, well, it was Cold War era. It was reported in the papers. His widow and his very young daughter were now left without a father. I don't know what compensation occurred at the time. But many, many years later, a group of us, including Jeremy Whitlock, who's now in Vienna, and Michael Stevens, who was our first president, and myself, we discovered that Stephen Whelan's widow still lived in Pembroke. And it was happenstance that we connected with her. It was wonderful. And they invited us to lunch with she and her daughter. And she'd remarried, so there was also a daughter from the second marriage. We had a wonderful lunch together, and there were some people there who actually were also at the accident that occurred in 1950, this really nasty explosion. And talking with them, we were able to share with them what we knew about the accident itself. We'd found some public domain information we could share with them, give to them. And it was really good because they felt, over the years, people had forgotten about Stephen's death. Anyway, we made them realize that it was known, it wasn't forgotten, that we were making sure that it wasn't forgotten. And so they were very pleased that we talked with them at lunch. And right at the end, Rita, this was Stephen's widow, she said to me, I'm not sure, but did Stephen cause the accident? This is 60 years later. And she was worried that her husband had perhaps caused the explosion. And I said emphatically, no, absolutely. The process they were doing, they ended up making ammonium nitrate as a part of this process, concentrating, and it blew up. It was a bad process. It was wrongly located. It wasn't carefully monitored enough, and he was there doing some other work, cleaning up some stuff. He had nothing to do with the accident. It just happened to go when he was there, and he was a very unfortunate consequence was he was killed, and 2 others were injured in the accident. So Rita told me, she said, "Oh, that's so good to know." She'd worried that perhaps he had caused his own death accidentally, but over the years, and I was able to reassure. That was wonderful. We actually managed to get Rita and her daughter. They visited us on site. We were able to see where Dad had been killed, where the building had been removed. So that was really very heartwarming. And they also appreciated when this story resurfaced actually in some OPEX training, operational experience training at the site. They actually wrote up a couple of pieces in the handout booklet that the people taking this course received. And it was bringing this industrial accident back into the present. What can we learn from it? And let's not forget about it. So that was really heartwarming and they really appreciated that his death wasn't futile, you might say. I think I got into things because I've always enjoyed reading history. So it's a natural outcome as a research engineer trying to find out why things were done a certain way with the CANDU reactor. That was my specialty. Other people visiting here, I'm very much encouraged when people come here and learn things about Canadian nuclear history, that it's an ongoing stream. They are part of this. Where did these things come from? Perhaps, where are they going? What's been explored before? Maybe they've never thought of this. Can we do something different in the future? And this connection with the pioneers in the past, I really enjoy that. And I enjoy seeing people who learn from that and learn sort of their place in this ongoing history, this ongoing story, really. And it's really very good too when we've had a few researchers come here to actually do historical research, and the most recent I recall is a woman from Italy came here and she was doing her PhD on decommissioning reactors. And she spent a day here looking through our files and whatever, and it really helped her. Well, as several people have said in the past, we attain our goals standing on the shoulders of giants, people who have gone before. Technical history in itself is intermixed with political and sort of general societal history. You can't really separate them. Technical history is particularly fascinating for me because I do like to learn the way things work, and nuclear reactors is my specialty in that area. Some interesting history that is so valuable is actually in the area from which I retired, was I worked in nuclear accidents, simulating postulated accidents, as we call, with the CANDU reactor. And you learn a lot from historical events, maybe not accidents that have happened, but precursor events. And it actually triggers in your mind what-if scenarios based on things that have actually happened. And so it can really feed very useful applications like that in terms of reactor simulation, for example, knowing what has happened at other reactors, whether or not they actually suffered an accident or whether they progressed partway along. Can they how well do they operate? We were talking earlier about thermosiphoning at Pickering plant during the blackout in 2003. Now the reactor was designed to do that, but also it gave us a little bit of information that some of our assumptions in our models, that they are reasonably correct. They reasonably model the actuality. And we assume thermosiphoning, and yet 2003, August, it was absolutely proven at Pickering. I think a very important thing to do is to have some kind of mentorship, as you mentioned, within companies, whether it's the big utilities or research companies, to make sure that the new people coming on board who are, their brains aren't filled with all sorts of stuff which needs throwing out. And, hopefully, people like myself can provide what's really useful for the new and upcoming people who are taking over, my job. I was blessed to be able to retire, and quite happy to do so because I saw younger people coming forward with all sorts of new ways of approaching things. There's computing skills, networking skills even, and are far superior to mine. And they know, they ask me why I do things the way I do. Well, because I'm comfortable with it. I know how to do it. And yet they've got another way, which is probably better. We have to, though, make sure that we pass on sufficient information that is useful. We often remember stories best, so if you can turn it into a story, that's good. And to be able to arm, so to speak, or enable the young generations not to make the same mistakes, or to know what happened with things in the past, learn from them, and have enough of a knowledge of things in the past that they can make sure in the future they say, make sure you don't do this, or you do something to make sure you don't repeat a mistake. For instance, with the Fukushima accident, severe accidents, which was my specialty, they hadn't learned sufficiently from how far tsunami waves might reach. And therefore, their station wasn't fully prepared for a really high inundation of water, which occurred. They also had, learned for units 5 and 6, they had they had one new emergency backup generator, and it was, they had several which were water cooled and in the basement of the reactor. It sounds like a reasonable place until you get flooded, and then they were corrupted. They couldn't operate. Units 5 and 6, though, slightly newer design, had learned, and they decided to, someone had said, we should build an air-cooled emergency generator a little farther up the hill. So units 5 and 6 had one generator which was working. Ironically, units 5 and 6 were shut down for maintenance at the time, so they didn't have the power requirements. But because people had looked at other reactors and said, we can improve on this, and so let's do it. However, unfortunately, it didn't get extended to the idea of, with the old reactors too, we should build some, from our experience and the possibility of a tsunami coming really high, we should build some air-cooled generators farther up the hill. That's a case where really good knowledge of OPEX, you might call it, but also design of the reactors, the design of systems, understanding the consequences. Someone saying, we've got all these generators, they're in a good place in the basement, they're safe, secure, it's well above the sea level. No one, really brought home that message to senior management there that, those have a common vulnerability. Maybe we need some extra backup methods. So that's another case of learning from history and perhaps learning from the old guard, so to speak. People have thought about things in the past, and then new people come along with fresh ideas and say, perhaps there were some younger people, but they weren't listened to, maybe, because they were young, they were inexperienced. So it's very important for us to be able to transfer our information to the next generation. Very important. I'm doing a series of videos of what we call nuclear pioneers. We're better late than never. Unfortunately, a lot of the very early pioneers have died years ago now. However, we've done about 19, 20 videos of some of the early explorers in this area. And it includes not just the research scientists and whatever, but also some people who were here in the early years as, one I can think of was sort of an early admin assistant, for instance, and her experiences in trying to guide this brand new experience, this brand new corporation, as it wasn't even then, it was a project, helping to guide that along. From the nuclear pioneers, a lot of it is actually simply recording history of what it was like to work here, what they did. It wasn't necessarily being able to capture the technical experience, though some of them have been very good with the technical experience and be able to lead people to, perhaps read up on certain reports. One fellow, for instance, was a specialist on pressure tubes, which are heart of a CANDU reactor. So that was a very good interview. That worked well. Some of them have been more sort of just anecdotal about what life was like here in the early days. I think it's important to record of where we were, both socially as well as technically, where we were and the progress over time. So some of those recordings are really sort of almost just for posterity and for those interested in the history of the site and the history of the town, whereas others actually have some gems of technical history in them which are worth extracting and worth reminding us of for the future, that we know perhaps where to go look for interesting details. Sometimes you hear, I remember stories of one of the great old timers who was at Atomic Energy in Sheridan Park. He was also at University of New Brunswick, and that was Dan Maneely, for instance. Apparently he told great stories in class, one of which I've recounted several times, of all sorts of bad things lining up, a Swiss cheese model, as they say, and caused an incident where, and it was great, a real example of when multiple things have lined up, and so therefore watch out for them. So we can learn a great deal from our predecessors. I would certainly welcome people to come here and visit us, see, touch, photograph. As I said, don't drop, but yes, actually be able to see some of these artifacts, hold them in your hand, get a grasp of some of, the nuclear industry. Nuclear science and technology in general is often perceived as being very spooky. It has connotations of the warfare where, World War II was where it was happening before World War II, but it really took off because of the Manhattan Project with dire consequences and led to, the Cold War afterwards, and a lot of things which are not pleasant sides of any technology. They get adapted for military purposes or for societal, more peaceful purposes. And I'm very glad that Canada has followed a path of peaceful nuclear science and technology. Very grateful for that. Canada had the possibility, really, we were number 2 in the world for nuclear technology following World War II. The United States had much more than we did, but we had much more than anyone else had put together. But Canada didn't follow that route of nuclear weapons technology. We've applied it to peaceful purposes ever since. And I'd love to see people come and visit us, email us, as I said. You can phone us, somehow contact us and book a tour. Come have some hands-on. Feel history in your hands. Hold it in your hands.